we're going to start with the Saturday only slate, and it's Seattle at San Francisco. San Francisco is a 9.5-point home favorite in this one. This will be a 4:30 p.m. start. So a little bit of a nice little break. We don't have to wake up early, Reeves, but what do you think about this NFC West matchup?
Yeah, this game is kind of, pushed to the front here for kind of a reason. Maybe it's more the ugly duckling of the slate, although, when we get to Sunday, maybe there's another couple of those too. But we've seen this game played twice. The 49ers kind of controlled both games pretty thoroughly. The Seattle Seahawks had 20 possessions in these two matchups and had one offensive touchdown. Not typically what you want for fantasy points. But the 49ers have been scoring a ton of points with Brock Purdy. And, we've kind of been waiting. Like, there's two shoes we've been waiting to drop. And, one is Brock Purdy and the other one is Jerick McKinnon. And neither one is budged. Yep. No one's conceding ground at this point. Brock Purdy has a 9% touchdown rate. He has thrown multiple passing touchdowns in each of the past 6 weeks. For context, Patrick Mahomes leads all qualifying quarterbacks with a 6.3% touchdown rate. So pretty big disparity here. Brock Purdy's living his absolute best life right now. Yep. And it's really kind of, hard to say this is a spot where he won't throw multiple passing touchdowns again. It's interesting. Teams have tried to get aggressive with Brock Purdy. They've blitzed him on 36.5% of his dropbacks. That's the fifth highest rate since, he took over as the starter. But against the blitz, he's got 7.6 yards per pass attempt, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. But where teams haven't blitzed him is when he's absolutely just raked. Mm-hmm. When teams haven't blitzed Brock Purdy, he's completed 72.4% of his passes. Only Justin Herbert has a higher completion rate when not blitzed over his span. 9.6 yards per pass attempt and a 9.2% touchdown rate when not blitzed. Seattle, the last time that these teams played Brock Purdy, they only blitzed him on 4 dropbacks.
Wow. Okay.
So, Seattle's going to have to alter that approach. They're going to have to try to get more aggressive with Purdy because if they just let him kind of drop back and pass, he's playing some really good point guard right now. Mm-hmm. He's got the weapons here to kind of take advantage. So I think it all kind of starts there. We do have a great quarterback slate. This weekend, oddly, too, a great tight end slate, which we never get to say. Yeah. It's really, really good tight ends on the board here. Picking out a stacking partner with Purdy, though, is pretty tough at the wide receiver position. Brandon Ayuk has been the better of the San Francisco wide receivers this season in totality. Even with Deebo Samuel on the field, Ayuk's been outscored him in 5 of the past 7 games that they've played together. But this is a terrible spot for Brandon Ayuk. He plays 82% of his snaps on the outside, and that's where the Seahawks have just been their best defensively. They've allowed just 6.9 yards per target. That's 4th in the NFL in opposing boundary receivers, a 3.9% touchdown rate. That's 12th. As a whole, Seattle's not even allowed a 100-yard wide receiver in a game since Jerry Jeudy in week 1. They allowed just 3 wide receiver scoring weeks on the season. That was the fewest in the NFL. When Ayuk played Seattle in these 2 matchups, he had 5 for 63, 2 for 19. It's not really just a good spot to where we want to attack Seattle. Where we do want to attack them, though, is with the tight end position. Mm-hmm. They're terrible against guarding the middle of the field. Tight ends have absolutely crushed them this season. They've just been absolutely ravaged by tight ends. They've allowed 8.9 yards per target to tight ends. That's 31st in the NFL. 6.4% touchdown rate. That's 21st in the NFL. Only the Arizona Cardinals allowed more PPR points per target to tight ends than Seattle did. And tight ends scored 22.9% of all fantasy points allowed by Seattle. That was the highest rate in the league. Kittle has been on just an absolute demon time. He's the one taking advantage of all this Brock Purdy touchdown bonanza, right? Yep. He has 7 touchdowns the past 4 weeks. The rest of the 49ers have 6 receiving touchdowns. The interesting thing is he only has 29 and 23 yards the past 2 weeks, and he's only cleared 30 yards twice over his past 7 games. But one of those was this matchup against Seattle where he had the 93 yards. We talked about them getting kind of bludgeoned. He would be kind of like the guy, if you're going to make Purdy lineups, to kind of be the stacking partner. And if you're going to go ISO, you can look at Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, before we get to the running backs, obviously there's a bunch of high-end running backs on this 2-game slate. George Kittle over on PrizePicks, that was one of the first ones I took this week. 40.5 is the receiving yards line for George Kittle. I have that a little bit closer to 55 in my kind of aggregate projection. So if you guys want to take advantage of that, make sure you use code HOLKA, get your free $100 bet if you have been with us all year. Make sure you guys take advantage of that if you haven't already. In 30 plus states, a lot of fun for the playoffs to have a little bit extra on the line. So love the Kittle call. I think on the DFS slate, he's probably going to be one of the highest owned players. And I guess we can kind of continue to transfer over to this next game too, Reeves, because these two running backs in particular, Austin Eckler and Christian McCaffrey, both 8,100 or above. They are the two highest players in terms of optimal rate. And according to Run the Sims, both these guys in 50% plus of the optimal lineups if we were to simulate this slate 10,000 times. So as we're kind of talking through McCaffrey in these backfields, what do you think about McCaffrey versus Eckler on this slate?
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting when we get to that game. Definitely look like Travis Etienne's outlook a lot. Obviously, can't go wrong with Austin Eckler, but he has had kind of his, I don't want to say worst because it's like air quotes, like the worst Austin Eckler game is still like a really good fantasy game. But his production has been down since, Keenan Allen has come back, especially in the receiving game. And we did know that like Austin Eckler's receiving output, like throughout the course of the season, even for as good as a receiving back he was aided by just the amount of injuries the Chargers had over the course of the season. And we've kind of seen that come down a little bit, although it is a pretty advantageous spot, again, for Austin Eckler. But I think when you look at McCaffrey, he offers probably a little bit more like probably, I don't want to say upside's the right word, but he does have kind of that spot where you look at when he joined the team, everyone was like, well, how is Kyle Shanahan going to use Christian McCaffrey? They've got all these weapons. Is he going to get used in the receiving game? Kyle Shanahan's never had a receiving back. And it turns out Christian McCaffrey creates his own opportunity, right? Like he led all running backs in receiving yardage. He was second in receptions, only behind Eckler since he was traded. Now, the interesting thing with Christian McCaffrey is we've got Elijah Mitchell back. And when you look at like their usage over the course of the regular season and the games they played together, Elijah Mitchell actually out-carried Christian McCaffrey in their games played together 34-32, but it was all mop-up stuff. And that's where you might be able to get an edge on people maybe saying, well, if Elijah Mitchell's carving into Christian McCaffrey, well, he's really not. In those games, Christian McCaffrey played 76 snaps in the first half of games to just 21 for Elijah Mitchell. In the second half of those games, it was tighter. McCaffrey had a 48-32 snap edge. So if this game is tight and we expect early on it to be, it's going to be all Christian McCaffrey building this lead, right? And then you might get cruise control Elijah Mitchell. But what if we never get cruise control in the playoffs, right? This, we assume a lot of these game scripts in these situations like that, and it doesn't always work out. So we still could get a complete full run out for Christian McCaffrey. In Seattle, since week 10, they're 28th in yards per carry allowed to running backs. They've allowed a touchdown or first down on 27% of those carries. It's 25th in the NFL. And on top of the rushing performance, Seattle also is 28th in receiving points allowed per game to opposing running backs. So it's kind of a fantastic layout for Christian McCaffrey as a huge home favorite against this opponent.
What do we do with the Seattle wide receivers, Reeves, before we move on to game number 2? Obviously, both these guys, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, look pretty good in the Sims. They look reasonably priced, but I mean, there's a lot to pay up for on the slate, obviously, with trying to get to Kittle at the tight end position and then these stud running backs. So are we able to get to DK and Lockett on this slate? And I guess should we be prioritizing them?
I think it depends. I think you really want to correlate your lineups and your bets, right? Like I think if you are a Seattle bettor, the Seattle plus 10, or you're doing any alt lines or you're picking them to win, like the way for them to get there is by both of these guys having huge games. And they did not have huge games in the regular season against them. But that's like the one path. The 49ers don't give up a lot of points, but when they do, it's to wide receivers. Wide receivers accounted for 57.9% of all PPR points allowed by the 49ers this season. That's the highest rate in the league. They allowed 8.5 yards per target to opposing wide receivers. That was 26th. 12.9 yards per catch is 19th, and a 4.8% touchdown rate, which is 21st. Now, if you want to pick the who and where, I do give Tyler Lockett a little bit of an edge. He has 4 of the 6 games when one of these two wide receivers has cleared 90 yards. He also has a little bit more higher touchdown equity, which you wouldn't think based on archetype of the wide receiver. And the 49ers also have been a little bit more vulnerable to opposing wide receivers on the inside than on the outside. Lockett plays 38% of his snaps in the slot compared to 16% for DK Metcalf. And to opposing slot receivers, the 49ers are 27th in yards per target, 26th in touchdown rate. Lockett did have 2 solid floor games against them. He had 9 catches for 107 yards, 7 catches for 68. So it's not like, you're getting buried even through the bad games that they've had against them. And then if you get the spike week where Seattle does put up more of a fight, they score more than one touchdown, I would assume it's probably has more to do with Tyler Lockett, having a bigger, game than he's had in those two games. But definitely if you want to bet the Seattle side or get on the Seattle side, the way to play it is through the wide receivers. If you are a believer in the Seahawks, combating this 49ers, juggernaut that's been the close of the season.
Yeah, before we get to the next game, and we'll talk about this a little bit on the next video for the Sunday only slate since it's 3 games, but playoff weeks, late swap becomes your best friend. You have to be doing it. I don't really think it's optional at this point. So basically the way we're going to be referring to these games is at game number 1 or game number 2. And then on Sunday, obviously we have a third game, but that's kind of how we're thinking through this. So that's game number 1. Game number 2, we do have the Chargers at Jacksonville. This total is a little bit higher at 47.5. The Chargers are a 2-point road favorite in this one. So that's going to be the night game, the hammer of a 2-game slate, I guess you could say. But what are your thoughts, I guess, on some priorities in Chargers-Jaguars, Reeves?
Yeah, this is on the first day of games. Obviously, everyone's going to be looking to this game. You got the 2 young quarterbacks in their first playoff game. Trevor Lawrence and Justin Herbert. Great hair matchup, too, for these 2 quarterbacks. If you're on that. But this game could be the shootout potential of the week. It's the second highest game total of the entire weekend. And I actually think this is the better bet between the other game that has the higher game total to go over, especially on neither one of these defenses has particularly that strong to talk about. The Jaguars are 18th in yards allowed per play. The Jaguars 29 are the 18th in yards allowed per play. Chargers 29th. Jacksonville allowed a touchdown on 21.7% of opposing drives. The Chargers 21st at 22%. Only the Lions allowed more plays of 30 or more yards this season than the Chargers. They also are the league's worst defense on first downs. Mm-hmm. Not only were they did allow the most yards per play on first down, they double dipped. They allowed the most rushing yards per play on first down and the most passing yards per play on first down. So they were complete. It wasn't just this the Chargers run defense is a huge part of that. Nope. They also were 32nd in the NFL in passing yards allowed per play on first down as well, too. The Chargers did kind of give us a couple moments here at the end of the season where they allowed 17 or fewer points in 4 straight games. But outside of the Dolphins, those games were against the Titans, the Colts, and the Rams. Every playoff team that they faced outside of the Dolphins this season, they allowed 27, 38, 37, 22, and 30 points, including the 38 they allowed to the Jaguars when these teams played in week 3. The Jaguars also, on the flip side, they only allowed the 10 points to the Chargers when they played. Obviously, there's some shadow cast over that. Justin Herbert didn't practice at all that week. That was the week he came off of the fractured rib injury and looked like he wasn't going to play, then did play. But outside allowing the 10 points to the Chargers, the other playoff teams that the Jaguars faced allowed 29 points to the Eagles, 23 points to the Giants, 27 points to the Chiefs, 27 points to the Ravens, 34 points to the Cowboys. So this game has plenty of potential to go and kind of fill our fantasy hopes and dreams on Saturday night.
Let me ask you about the wide receivers. So Keenan Allen at $7K, and we have these expensive running backs to pay up for. Still looks pretty good in the Sims. Top 4 in the Sims over on Draftkings and 47% of the optimal lineups. And does, in theory, probably have the highest ceiling, at least projection-wise, of these wide receivers on this 2-game slate. So what do we do with Keenan Allen? And I guess how do we prioritize him versus paying up, I guess, at tight end and at running back on this slate?
Yeah, Keenan Allen, since he came back in week 11, only Justin Jefferson had more targets than Keenan Allen, but he led all wide receivers in catches and yards to go along with 4 touchdowns. He also aided, by running a league high. He ran the most routes in the NFL, too, since he came back. So that did help him. But he still was targeted on 25% of his routes. That was good for 10th among wide receivers over that span. Since he came back to the lineup, he leads all receivers with 38 catches from the slot. And his 428 yards from the slot trail only CeeDee Lamb over that span. The Jaguars have been giving it up to slot receivers all year. They're 24th in catches allowed to slot receivers this season, 5 per game. They also have allowed 8.5 yards per target to opposing slot receivers. That's 21st. A 5.1% touchdown rate on those targets. That's also 21st. We might not see a fully healthy Big Mike Williams here. So, yeah, Keenan Allen looks like he has a clean runway to kind of roll over the strong close to the season that he had. If we do not get Big Mike, even if we do get Big Mike, it's kind of this matchup is set for just like the kind of all or nothing game for Mike Williams anyways. And that's what happened in the first matchup between these teams. The Jaguars are actually really good against opposing boundary wide receivers. They're 6th in the NFL in yards per target, but they give up a ton of touchdowns to those wide receivers. They're 30th in touchdown rate, 29th in touchdowns allowed. And that's kind of what happened when Big Mike played this team earlier in the year. He caught just 1 of 6 targets, but 1 was a 15-yard touchdown. Yeah. Also, Josh Palmer had a pretty good game in that game. He had 6 catches for 99 yards. Obviously, Keenan Allen was out. He does get a bump with Mike Williams, being out. He's been targeted on 20.5% of his routes with Mike Williams off the field, and it's still 19.1% when it's with Keenan Allen on the field. So he does get a bump there. If we do not get Mike Williams, you'll have to take that into the 11th hour. I'm sure on Saturday they know if he's going to be active or not with this back injury.
They priced him up, Reeves. He's $5,500, so he's not free. He's the same price basically as getting Christian Kirk in your lineup, getting Brandon Ayuk in your lineup, and then if you're just staring at some of these tight ends, I mean, he's not that much cheaper than George Kittle. So, I mean, it's kind of even tough if we don't get Big Mike to get him in there. But we'll keep an eye on that.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're going to chase on this slate, obviously too, it's a good tight end slate. Gerald Everett does have a touchdown in his last 2 games. And if you do want to chase touchdowns and efficiency from tight ends, I mean, the Jaguars have been an accommodating defense. They've allowed a league high 9.5 yards per target to tight ends, 20th in touchdown rate. We even saw that to close the season when both, Chig Okonkwo and Austin Hooper get there on their overs. So it's easy to lose sight of Gerald Everett on a slate like this, but he also becomes a stacking partner for Justin Herbert.
All right, make sure you guys check out the worksheet over at sharpfootballanalysis.com if you want more on these 2 games. Before we build the DraftKings lineup, our gentleman's agreement. If this is your first time here, welcome, hang out, feel free, kick your feet up. But if you've been with us all season, or maybe this gets like the second time you've watched us, I'd appreciate it if you guys hit that subscribe button. I don't think it's too much to ask. I see it every single week. About half of you guys that watch these videos are not subscribed. So trying to get up over 20K subscribers by the Super Bowl. Need your help to get there. So, Reeves, if we were to build for this specific 2-game slate, obviously we're going to be game stacking because you kind of have to, but it sounds like you're leaning towards game number 2 here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we didn't really talk about the quarterbacks, but I do favor Justin Herbert here. The Jaguars have really gotten off light the last 3 weeks facing Zach Wilson, Davis Mills, and Josh Dobbs. But if you look at this from week 6 to 15, Matt Ryan, 27 points. Daniel Jones, 28. Derek Carr, 18. Patrick Mahomes, 31. Lamar Jackson, 23. Jared Goff, 22 points. Ryan Tannehill, 18. Dak Prescott, 20 points. They got flooded by a lot of quarterbacks over that span. So I like Herbert in this spot. So let's do Herbert and Keenan Allen and then see. Well, we might as well, because we only have 2 games, so we got to add more Chargers. So let's do the Gerald Everett too. Let's add Gerald Everett here too.
Okay. Cool. So we got tons of salary to work with. We haven't talked about defense a ton. This is my general strategy on defenses for these shorter slates where we have late swap available. I'm almost always going to pick the defense in game number 2 or later on in the slate. And then if you are in good shape, you can play the chalk defense. If you're not in good shape, you need to pivot to the lowest owned defense. That's kind of how I approach it. Unless there's an absolute stone lock defense, it's kind of how I approach it. We do have a quarterback and it's only a 2-game slate. So this would be the situation where, if you wanted to take a shot on Seattle or San Francisco, it would make more sense on a 2-game slate. But is there a defense you like, Reeves? So I'll just kick that one to you.
Not really. I don't really like. Obviously, the 49ers would be the optimal choice. But I mean, this is a situation where 49ers on with only 4 games, them being by far the clear defense, the best play, where you'd want to go against them though, right?
Trying to win here, Reeves. That's the problem, right? If 49ers is going to be 50% owned or even higher than that, I'm sure in some of the smaller field stuff, I'd prefer to go another direction, even if it looks kind of weird with our roster.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. You only need the 4. And there's a lot of ways for a defense to fail or even have a great game and not score fantasy points, right? The 49ers had a fantastic game against the Seattle Seahawks on Thursday night a couple weeks ago. And for fantasy, was it anything scary? Really. What did they score in that game? They scored 9 fantasy points, right?
Yeah.
So, that didn't kill you if you missed out on those 9 points and if you got 3 from someone else, right?
Do we play the
I would rather save that
blow
salary.
Up finally game, or I don't know.
Let's stick Seattle in there for grins just for now, and if we can go up to maybe we can, but I don't mind punting it on this.
Okay.
at all.
Well, we're going to have to get some running backs
or
in
going
here.
Chargers.
I didn't mention it
yeah,
before.
let's do Travis
yeah,
Etienne.
I was just going to mention
sure.
Etienne is far and away the highest guy in the Sims over on FanDuel, still top 3 on DraftKings as well. 6K is a really nice price tag for him. They kind of had to price him down. You wouldn't be able to build lineups if you put Etienne at like 7,200.
That's true. Yeah, because you've got McCaffrey and Eckler here. The question is, which one of those guys do we try to jam
only
in?
afford one, I think. So
I know.
Yeah, I mean we're going to be pretty Jacksonville and Chargers heavy in this one, so we can either add to our
and we're pretty invested on Eckler not scoring touchdowns already. I think we do the CMC.
Okay, let's do it. Let's put CMC in there, and then we probably need to have at least one cheaper option here. But man, they kind of priced down a couple of these wide receivers, so it's not terrible.
Yeah, let's go back to Zay Jones. We know what we're buying here. He's going to get targets. Also, he does get a nice little bump in man coverage. The Chargers actually play a lot of man coverage. And against man coverage, Zay Jones has been targeted on 26% of his routes compared to 20% against zone. He did have 11 targets when these teams played earlier in the year too, so that kind of correlates too with that little statistical nugget as well. So we know we're at least buying targets. Now, is Zay Jones going to do something with them? To be determined.
Right. We could probably still get Kittle on this team if we wanted to. He's basically the same price as a lot of these wide receivers if we decide we like him more than like a Kirk or a Ayuk. Kind of interesting.
Yeah, is this a spot where we try to do like a Lockett? Could we do Lockett?
We get Lockett in there, then we're looking at either Palmer or... it gets a little bit gross fast. It's like these backup running backs. So that limits us a little bit more if we get up to Lockett. If we put Kittle in, that gives us 5,500. So basically the same exact wide receivers. Yeah, so it's basically we just got to decide that part, I guess.
And we have Etienne going 3 Jaguars, probably not the greatest. I would. So do we just do like Lockett and Josh Palmer and try to just get all the Herbert stuff?
Yeah, we just hope that Palmer makes.
I think with this build that makes the most sense.